Go! As the bronze gate suddenly shattered open, Mandala's soft command echoed in Chen and the others' ears. The group immediately shot out, turning into several beams of light, heading straight for the gate. Mandala led the charge, stepping into the gate. The moment Chen passed through the bronze gate, he distinctly felt spatial fluctuations around him. His vision darkened for an instant, then suddenly cleared. However, just as clarity returned, a terrifying, overwhelming, and savage aura of battle intent swept in from all directions, like a ferocious beast bent on destroying the world itself. Under that horrifying aura, Chen and the others felt cold sweat immediately soak their backs. Roar! They raised their eyes, only to realize that the world before them had changed beyond recognition, that it looked like an endless plain, and under the dim, yellowish sky, massive cracks were forming across the land, tearing apart the space. From these cracks, an enormous wave of evil energy surged out, followed by a constant flood of black torrents emerging from the rifts in space. Strange, eerie growls echoed from the black torrents. The sound seemed completely out of place in this world, as if the spiritual energy in the air was fleeing. Rejecting the presence of these sounds, Chen fixed his gaze on the black torrent. His heart suddenly racing, he saw countless indistinct black figures in the stream. These shadows appeared massive, their bodies resembling smoke, subtly distorted, only their heads had dim red eyes that slowly gleamed with a greedy, devouring hunger. The sharp, screeching sound, which was rejected by the spiritual energy of the world, came from these very figures as the black torrents poured out of the space rifts and filled the world. The spiritual energy in the atmosphere seemed to boil. Chen looked up, and in the distant sky, dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them overwhelming light and shadows sweeping across the heavens. Upon closer inspection, it was revealed that countless powerful beings from the great thousand worlds, radiating strong spiritual energy, were arriving. Roar! The infinite black torrent roared in response to the oncoming forces from the great thousand worlds, and the two forces collided with a destructive force, shattering the very space itself. As the torrents clashed, Chen and the others could clearly see several black smoke-like figures moving through the space. These seemingly smoke-like limbs instantly pierced through the powerful defenses of one of the great experts. The arms like razor-sharp blades, driving deep into the person's body. Expert screamed in agony, and his body rapidly shriveled and withered. In just a few moments, he exploded into dust, scattering into the wind, while the black shadow let out a creepy, eerie laugh. This scene sent a chill down Chen and the others' spines. Such a brutal battle was happening everywhere in this world. The intense killing intent filled the air, and under the pressure of this deadly aura, Chen and the others felt their eyes tinged with a crimson red. Boom! But just as their eyes grew redder, a clear ringing sound from a bell suddenly echoed, the sound reverberating in their minds like a divine awakening, instantly clearing their thoughts. The crimson hue faded, and they were freed from the oppressive killing intent. Even so, they were left with a lingering unease. Looking up, they saw Mandala standing in front of them. With a flick of her hand, the spiritual energy rippled, and a crisp bell sound resonated. Clearly, she had used that bell to pull them out of the influence of the killing intent. This is the war that erupted on the fallen battlefield when the extraterritorial clan invaded the great thousand worlds, Mandala said, gazing down at the fierce battle below. Though Chen and the others had suspected as much, hearing Mandala confirm it caused their pupils to contract. These smoke-like figures, could they be the so-called extraterritorial clan? The extraterritorial clan, who appeared from an unknown place, devours the spiritual energy of the world like locusts wherever they go. If they are allowed to occupy the great thousand worlds, the entire world will collapse, and the lower dimensions beneath it will be affected as well. I once saw a large continent that had been invaded by the extraterritorial clan. There, all the spiritual energy had vanished, making it unsuitable for spiritual cultivation. The beings on that continent had also become exceptionally ordinary due to the loss of spiritual energy. Mandala's small face grew much more serious at that moment as she spoke. Hiss! Chen and the others couldn't help but inhale sharply upon hearing this. They simply couldn't imagine what the world would be like without spiritual energy. For the Great Thousand Worlds, it would undoubtedly be an apocalypse. No wonder the entire Great Thousand World would unite against the invasion of the extraterritorial clan, because the consequences of that would be catastrophic for all cultivators in the world. The ancient battlefield here is just a projection. Do not let its murderous aura affect you. Otherwise, you too will become one of its victims, Mandala reminded them. Chen and the others hurriedly nodded. If Mandala hadn't been there to protect them earlier, it's likely that fewer than half of them would have survived. This Earth's supreme treasure truly was fraught with danger at every turn. Mandala noticed their expressions and said no more. She turned and shot toward the end of the world before them. With a wave of her small hand, she directly shielded the overwhelming killing intent surging below. Chen and the others immediately followed suit, circulating their spiritual energy to protect their bodies, not daring to slack off for even a moment. As they soared over the battlefield, Chen and the others finally realized the vastness of this battlefield. They had been flying for what seemed like an eternity, yet the battlefield still showed no signs of ending. The entire world seemed to be gradually turning a deep crimson from the pervasive killing intent. Chen and the others had no idea how much longer they would need to fly, but since Mandala hadn't spoken, they had no choice but to stay closely behind her. After what seemed like an eternity, Mandala's figure ahead finally slowed a little. Then, her serious voice rang in everyone's ears. Everyone, be extra cautious. Upon hearing Mandala's warning, Chen and the others froze for a moment, but they instinctively tensed up and circulated their spiritual energy. Buzz, just as they were protecting themselves with their spiritual energy, they suddenly realized that the violent sounds of battle in the world had abruptly ceased. The surroundings also underwent a drastic change at that moment. The vast battlefield had disappeared, replaced by an endless expanse of ocean. The ocean was dark green in color, with waves howling as they surged and then fell as the waves crashed. Chen and the others clearly saw that the space seemed to be shattered by the force of the waves. Every drop of water in this sea seemed as heavy as 1,000 pounds, and Chen and the others stared in awe at the scene before them. The ocean appeared bottomless, and the deep, dark sea seemed to transform into an infinite abyss, sending a chill down their spines. Above the sea, a deep and impenetrable darkness loomed as well. Chen and the others exchanged glances. Although this strange ocean did not have the same murderous aura as the ancient battlefield, for some unknown reason, they still felt an overwhelming sense of pressure. The pressure was hard to explain, but was so heavy that it made it difficult to breathe. Mandala stood in the air, her golden eyes scanning the dark green ocean. After a moment, golden light seemed to flash in her eyes, and she murmured, "Quite a clever method. Domain Lord, what is this place?" Heavenly Vulture Emperor asked in a low voice. Even he could feel the invisible pressure from this ocean. "If I'm not mistaken, this should be the Supreme Sea created by the Fourth Hall Master," Mandala said lightly. "Supreme Sea created?" The king's eyes widened in shock, staring dumbfounded at the world before them. The Supreme Sea was the source of power for every Supreme, so they were all very familiar with it. However, it was the first time any of them had seen a Supreme Sea capable of transforming into such a scene. When one's strength reaches the level of the Fourth Hall Master, the Supreme Sea becomes equivalent to a space. When encountering an enemy, the Supreme Sea can be unleashed, directly pulling the enemy into it. At that point, even an 8th grade Supreme would be crushed into nothingness by a single wave of spiritual energy. Mandala explained to Chen, and the others couldn't help but click their tongues in awe. For individuals at their level, the Supreme Sea was typically hidden in the most secretive parts of their bodies, out of fear of it being destroyed. After all, for a Supreme-level expert, even if their physical body were destroyed, it wouldn't matter. But if their Supreme Sea were destroyed, all their cultivation would be lost. Thus, no one would dare to easily draw an opponent into their Supreme Sea. But they never expected that the very technique they feared would be so terrifying in the hands of an Earth Supreme. "This should be the center of the Earth Supreme's secret treasure," Mandala said, her golden eyes scanning the vast ocean, her small hand pointing toward the depths. "Everyone, be careful." Chen and the others, upon hearing this, felt a slight shiver in their hearts. Had they finally reached the center of this Earth Supreme's domain? They couldn't help but wonder if the other top forces had already arrived as well. The kings exchanged glances, their expressions tightening as they sensed the impending storm. Above the vast sea, the ancient stone island floated silently, and around it, a gathering of powerful figures could be seen. Most notably, 7 figures stood in midair, seemingly untouched by any spiritual fluctuations. But everyone knew that when they struck, it would cause the heavens and earth to tremble. 7 Earth Supremes. This was the most impressive lineup Chen had ever seen in his years of experience. At this moment, all 7 of the top forces had gathered here. Amid the confrontation of these 7 Earth Supremes, the powerful experts from the various factions dared not speak. The subtle yet oppressive aura emanating from these 7 figures made it hard to breathe. Clearly, only those at the Earth Supreme level had the right to dominate this place. Chen exchanged a look with the Netherworld Prince, both of them secretly marveling at the overwhelming atmosphere before them. I never thought that in this grand hunting war, we would all choose the same target, said the Lord of the Divine Pavilion, smiling as he broke the silence. The Earth Supreme's secret treasure left behind by the 4th Supreme must be the strongest hidden treasure in the fallen battlefield. It has eluded us for so long, but now, it has finally emerged. We naturally must seize this opportunity, said the ancestor of myriad saints, dressed in a starry white robe. His voice, though calm, was as deep as the toll of a bell, resonating across the heavens and earth, stirring the spiritual energy. The Lord of the Divine Pavilion's eyes slightly lowered, his crimson gaze resembling a world of flowing magma. Beneath the dazzling radiance, there lay a power capable of incinerating the heavens and earth. He smiled lightly and said, "Among you all, I am probably the closest to becoming an Upper Earth Supreme. As long as I obtain the 4th Supreme's divine spirit liquid, the breakthrough will be effortless. But you all, due to lacking the necessary foundation, face many risks." Upon hearing this, several leaders of the top factions frowned slightly. However, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion paid no heed and continued. "So, if any of you are willing to part with it, once I succeed in my breakthrough, not only will the northern domain be under our control, but even the lands beyond the northern domain will belong to us, the vast Tianluo continent, with your vision. Should you really be content to be confined to this small corner of the world?" Upon hearing the Lord of the Divine Pavilion's words, the 6 Earth Supremes exchanged fleeting glances, but none of them spoke. With their status and mindset, it was clear that such words would not easily change their thoughts. You speak with great ambition, but in this world, the most trustworthy things are the ones you claim as your OWNS. Don't expect this emperor to give you the divine spirit liquid AS for ownership. Let's see who takes it by their own strength, said the demon emperor, his deep voice resounding from within his black armor. Hiss. I'm just afraid that once you break through, your appetite will grow too large, and you'll want to devour our forces as well. Don't think I'm so foolish as to make such a mistake, hissed the old serpent ghost from the Serpent God Temple, his voice rasping with disdain. The 2 Earth Supremes clearly scoffed at the Lord of the Divine Pavilion's suggestion, while the remaining Earth Supremes seemed indifferent. That's truly unfortunate, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion replied with a smile, showing no sign of anger. However, his eyes, like pools of swirling magma, seemed to grow even hotter. Enough of this nonsense. We'll talk about the ownership of the divine spirit liquid after we actually see it. Mandala's golden eyes shifted toward the ancient stone island, and she spoke again. The divine spirit liquid should be inside that stone island, but I fear that stepping foot onto it won't be so easy. Hearing Mandala steer the conversation back on track, the remaining 6 Earth Supremes also turned their gazes toward the ancient stone island. Their eyes narrowed slightly. As with their extraordinary senses, they could faintly perceive that this ancient stone island was far from ordinary. The space around this stone island has been reinforced by some special power, and I can feel a powerful force guarding it, said Lu Tiandao of the Xiantian Palace, speaking slowly. Let's try and see, the Lord of the Netherworld Palace said. With a sudden wave of his hand, terrifying spiritual energy erupted from his body like a storm. This vast spiritual energy quickly transformed into a massive black handprint, about 1,000 feet in size. From a distance, it appeared as though the handprint was made of black crystal, and its mighty, howling descent tore open a massive rift in the sea below. This casual display of power by the Lord of the Netherworld Palace immediately showcased the terrifying strength of an Earth Supreme. Even such a seemingly nonchalant strike could instantly cripple someone of the strength of the Heavenly Vulture Emperor, or, perhaps, even the Sleeping King, who had reached the 9th grade Supreme level. Boom! The black handprint descended with overwhelming force, and the momentum was so fierce that anything in its path would be reduced to dust. However, the ancient stone island remained completely unmoved as Chen and the others watched without blinking. The black handprint quickly closed in on the stone island, in the span of a breath. It was only 1,000 feet away. But just as it neared, a series of rays suddenly appeared above the ancient stone island. These rays crisscrossed like lightning, swiftly, forming a crystal-like light barrier that enveloped the island below. Boom! Boom! The black handprint slammed heavily against the crystal light barrier, and the resulting shockwaves surged outward. The visible shockwaves exploded, covering an area of several tens of thousands of feet. However, as the shockwaves reached Mandala and the other 6 Earth Supremes, they vanished without a trace. Sparing the forces behind them from harm as the shockwaves dissipated, the group immediately shifted their gaze, and their expressions subtly changed. They realized that after withstanding the blow from the Lord of the Netherworld Palace, the crystal light barrier had hardly budged. Such terrifying defensive power, Chen and the others were inwardly stunned. The mere presence of this crystal light barrier was enough to keep everyone below Earth Supreme level at bay. It seems there's some merit to it. The Lord of the Netherworld Palace commented indifferently. He wasn't surprised if the protective measures left by someone like the 4th Hall Master were so easily shattered. He would find that strange. Everyone, since we're all here for the treasure, let's join forces and break through it together, Mandala said, her gaze fixed on the crystal light barrier. The other 6 Earth Supremes exchanged glances and nodded. Given their cautious nature, they certainly wouldn't make the mistake of letting one person waste energy breaking the barrier while others reaped the benefits. It was best to act together in such a situation. Once they reached a consensus, the 7 of them moved without hesitation. Their bodies slowly lifted into the air and hovered around the ancient stone island from various directions. Seeing this, Chen and the others quickly retreated. The combined power of 7 Earth Supreme-level beings would undoubtedly shake the heavens and earth. If they were caught in the crossfire, there would be no chance to even complain. As Chen and the others withdrew, Mandala and the 6 Earth Supremes slowly raised their palms. In that instant, Chen and the others clearly felt the spiritual energy in the air boiling like oil in a pot. Vast spiritual energy surged from behind the 7 figures, and from a distance, it looked as though 7 massive suns were rising behind them. This was a phenomenon that could only occur when spiritual energy had gathered to a terrifying level. Boom! Without hesitation, Mandala and the others activated their spiritual energy, and a palm came crashing down. Crack! 7 spiritual energy whips shot out, and wherever they passed, the space itself shattered into pieces, with fragments flying everywhere. Boom! Boom! The 7 spiritual energy whips, resembling giant dragons, tore through the space. In the blink of an eye, they arrived above the stone island and slammed heavily into the crystal light barrier. The moment the impact occurred, the world seemed to fall silent for an instant, before the shockwave exploded outward like a tornado, wreaking havoc. Below, the ocean was directly churned into towering waves that swept far into the distance, with the space itself cracking apart wherever they passed. Even though Chen and the others had retreated far, they were still slightly pale from the shockwave. Each using their methods to stabilize themselves as they regained their footing, they exchanged glances, each reading the shock in the other's eyes. This was the power of an Earth Supreme, a single movement capable of destroying heaven and earth if they truly fought. Even this space itself would likely not be able to withstand the devastation. Such a terrifying attack. Even if the light barrier was left by the 4th Hall Master, it should have shattered by now, right? The thought flashed through the minds of many powerful figures. Their gazes immediately shifted to the distant stone island, and then their pupils constricted that a cold breath escaped their lips. For in the sky above the stone island, the crystal light barrier still hung, glowing brightly with no sign of being shattered. The crystal light barrier had actually withstood the attacks of the 7 Earth Supremes and remained completely unharmed. At this moment, not only were Chen and the others stunned, but even Mandala, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion, and the other Earth Supremes furrowed their brows, clearly sensing that something was amiss. "It seems there's something strange here," Mandala said in a low voice. The Lord of the Divine Pavilion furrowed his brows. After a moment, his eyes suddenly sharpened, and his gaze locked onto the light barrier, where a flicker of light appeared. The light points began to slowly condense. Mandala and the others also noticed and immediately focused their attention. The light points on the crystal barrier quickly converged, and under the gaze of all present, they finally formed the figure of a person in a green robe. The figure sat quietly atop the light barrier, with white eyebrows and eyes tightly shut. Chen and the others stared at the suddenly appeared green-robed figure, momentarily stunned. But before they could voice their confusion, they saw the shocked expressions on Mandala and the others. Then, they heard the Lord of the Divine Pavilion's voice, laced with faint astonishment, causing their hearts to skip a beat and their scalp to tingle. "Is that the 4th Hall Master?" The massive crystal light barrier shimmered with brilliance, and at that moment, all eyes in this world were drawn to the green-robed figure atop it, filled with shock. Even the 7 Earth Supremes, the most powerful figures here, could not hide their astonishment. With their experience, they immediately recognized the figure in the green robe. It was none other than the owner of this secret treasure, the 4th Hall Master, who had fallen in ancient times. The 4th Hall Master, far in the distance, all the powerful figures were stunned. Such a person, though long fallen, still had a legendary reputation. It was said that during the ancient era, when the ancient heavenly palace ruled the Tianluo continent, the 4th Hall Master was in charge of the northern domain, overseeing this vast region. But now, the northern domain was a place of chaos, with no one strong enough to claim dominance. This made it clear that the 4th Hall Master's power and achievements were unmatched by anyone present. No one here could compare to him, which is why seeing him again caused such shock. The surrounding powerful figures were stunned. Mandala and the other Earth Supremes narrowed their eyes, gazing at the green-robed figure, hesitant to make a move. The person before them was indeed the 4th Hall Master, but Mandala and the others knew well that this 4th Hall Master had truly fallen. The figure before them was likely the spiritual manifestation he left behind through some special method. Yet, even such a spiritual manifestation was enough to make Mandala and the others wary. Between Earth Supremes, each level represented a massive difference in strength. Although the 4th Hall Master had been merely an upper Earth Supreme in life, it seemed like a small step above them. But Mandala and the others knew well that such a small difference in rank could easily crush them. The 7 Earth Supremes hovered in the air, their gazes fixed on the 4th Supreme. Around them, vast and terrifying spiritual energy fluctuations rose, clearly indicating their deep wariness of him. Under their strict and watchful gazes, the figure in the green robe finally slowly opened its tightly shut eyes. The moment its eyes opened, the vast ocean below seemed to erupt in towering waves, roaring as if it were cheering for the return of its former master. A spiritual pressure, far more terrifying than anything possessed by Mandala or the others, slowly radiated from the green-robed figure. Upon sensing this spiritual pressure, even Mandala and the others couldn't help but shrink their pupils in surprise. How could the spiritual body left by the 4th Hall Master possess such terrifying power? Lu Tiandao of the Xiantian Palace spoke solemnly. Normally, even if the 4th Hall Master was an upper Earth Supreme in life, it's difficult for his spiritual body to retain such strength after his death. This is likely no ordinary spiritual body. There is no trace of intelligence in its eyes, the Demon Emperor of the Demon Gate said, his eyes flashing with a sharp gleam. Mandala also nodded, noticing the same. The 4th Hall Master's spiritual body had no spiritual light in its eyes, only emptiness. Normally, such figures would leave behind a spiritual body that retained some intelligence, but this one appeared more like a puppet. The Lord of the Divine Pavilion narrowed his eyes slightly. After a moment, he spoke calmly. Indeed, it is not a normal spiritual body that, if my guess is correct, this is a special kind of spirit puppet, crafted with a unique method. Before his demise, the fourth hall master infused his own spiritual energy into it, and with the aid of some strange techniques, it has been preserved as a guardian. Hearing the Lord of the Divine Pavilion's words, Mandala and the others were astonished. The fourth hall master was indeed impressive to have created such a powerful puppet. No matter how powerful this spirit puppet is, I don't believe it could possibly be an Upper Earth Supreme. As long as it isn't at that level, the 7 of us together should have no trouble dealing with it. The Lord of the Netherworld Palace sneered. Everyone, let's strike together. Upon hearing the command from the Lord of the Netherworld Palace, Mandala and the others nodded. To enter this stone island, they would have to defeat the spirit puppet left behind by the fourth hall master, and to do so, they had no choice but to team up. Boom. A torrent of spiritual energy, towering as high as 10,000 zhong, surged from the 7 of them, swirling with countless spiritual energy crystals. The immense pressure even caused the very space around them to warp and shatter. Go! The 7 Earth Supremes launched their attacks once more. The vast spiritual energy river cut through the sky like a dragon with bared fangs, charging directly at the green-robed figure as the 7 Earth Supremes attacked. The fourth hall master's spiritual body stood up from the crystal light shield. With an indifferent gaze, it looked at the terrifying onslaught coming toward it, and suddenly, both of its hands shot up. Boom. The moment its hands raised, the vast ocean below began to tremble. Towering waves shot up into the sky. These were no ordinary waves, but terrifying spiritual energy condensed to the extreme. The spiritual energy waves rushed toward them, quickly forming a massive whirlpool around the fourth hall master's spiritual body. As the whirlpool spun, the entire 10,000 zhong space shattered, with fragments of space being sucked into it, giving the whirlpool immense destructive power. Bang! Bang! The 7 spiritual energy rivers struck fiercely against the colossal whirlpool, causing the entire world to tremble. Though each strike slowed the whirlpool's rotation, it still could not break it. The spiritual energy rivers continued to slam into the whirlpool. Finally, when the last river exploded in the collision, the massive whirlpool shattered, turning into a storm of spiritual energy that poured down like rain. This fourth hall master is terrifying. From a distance, Chen and the others watched the earth-shaking battle. Their hearts moved. The fourth hall master, though long dead, was still able to effortlessly fend off the combined might of the 7 Earth Supremes. Such power was truly unnatural. Before them, even the sleeping king, heavenly vulture emperor, and spirit pupil emperor had solemn expressions. Their sharper senses made them realize just how terrifying the fourth hall master was. They couldn't help but wonder why, after his death, he remained so powerful that they were moved. The battle in the distance began to intensify. After witnessing the power of the fourth hall master's spirit puppet, Mandala and the other 6 no longer dared to hold back in the slightest. The 7 Earth Supremes immediately pushed their strength to the limit, their vast spiritual energy seemingly manifesting an entire world behind them. Brilliant spiritual energy was constantly crystallizing, pouring down like a torrential storm, bombarding the fourth hall master. Under this relentless barrage, the space within tens of thousands of zhong around the stone island shattered, and the ocean below was torn apart with massive, gaping rifts. Only after a long time did the seawater slowly restore itself. Faced with the furious attacks of the 7 Earth Supremes, the fourth hall master remained firmly stationed above the stone island. It did not take any offensive action. All its efforts were focused on defense. Yet, it was this formidable defense that made it impossible for the 7 Earth Supremes to step onto the stone island. Boom! A spiritual energy beam, resembling a crystallized spiritual stone, shot out from Mandala's delicate hand, piercing the sky and enveloping the fourth hall master. As she launched the attack, her golden eyes flashed slightly. By now, she had figured it out. The spirit puppet left by the fourth hall master didn't seem to actively attack. Instead, all its power was focused on defending the ancient stone island. Although the 7 of them had teamed up, Mandala knew they were all holding back. None of them were fighting with all their strength because no one wanted to waste energy in a situation like this. After all, the divine spirit liquid hadn't appeared yet, but if they kept dragging things out like this, it seemed endless. They couldn't step onto the stone island, which meant they couldn't obtain the divine spirit liquid. Were they really planning to exhaust the spirit puppet's spiritual energy? That would be foolish. Mandala's eyes rapidly flickered, and after a moment, her gaze suddenly landed on the crystal light shield outside the stone island. Her eyes narrowed slightly. This battle, I wonder how long it will last. Far behind, the sleeping king watched the earth-shattering battle and shook his head helplessly. He could clearly see that the 7 Earth Supremes were not truly cooperating. Chen and the others shrugged. They weren't surprised by the situation. The leaders of these top forces all had their own agendas. How could they possibly cooperate wholeheartedly? People of the great Luo Heaven Domain, listen up. I'll find an opportunity to tear open a gap in that crystal light shield. When I do, you'll seize the chance and rush in to retrieve the divine spirit liquid. Suddenly, Mandala's serious voice echoed in their ears. Hearing the transmission, the 3 emperors and Chen all paused for a moment before exchanging a glance. They then subtly nodded that it seemed that the 7 Earth Supremes were tied up, and the next step would require them to act. Boom. A terrifying wave of spiritual energy constantly ravaged the area around the stone island. The spirit puppet, formed from the 4th Hall Master, remained completely defensive against the 7 Earth Supreme's onslaught. However, as time passed, some of the spiritual energy's residual shockwaves reverberated across the crystal light shield, creating ripples. Though the spirit puppet inherited the 4th Hall Master's power, it lacked intelligence, which gave Mandala and her group an opportunity. Boom! Another fierce collision occurred. This time, Mandala and the others increased their power. The violent impact even pushed the 4th Hall Master's spirit puppet back several steps. Opportunity. At the moment the 4th Hall Master's spirit puppet staggered back, Mandala's golden eyes flashed, and she flicked her finger. A dazzling sword light shot out from her fingertip, breaking through the spirit puppet's defense with indescribable speed and slamming into a corner of the crystal light shield. Sizzle, the sword light, sharp to the extreme, even tore a crack in the indestructible crystal light shield. Now, Mandala whispered in her heart that a spiritual boat, like a streak of light, suddenly shot out from behind them. Just as the crack in the shield was about to close, it slipped through the gap. Inside the spiritual boat, the figures of the 3 emperors and Chen could be seen. It's in. Mandala relaxed slightly when she saw this. But before she could fully breathe a sigh of relief, her eyes widened in shock. From other directions, the other 6 Earth Supremes had also found their openings, and, with powerful forces, tore through the gaps in the crystal light shield. At the same time, a flash of light appeared behind them, rushing into the stone island. These cunning old foxes had all come up with the same idea. They had also sent their subordinates into the stone island, intending to have them search for the spiritual divine liquid and snatch it for themselves. Mandala looked up just in time to see the other 6 Earth Supremes exchange glances. Then, with fake smiles, they awkwardly twitched their faces. These old foxes. Outside the stone island, Mandala looked at the subordinates of other factions, who had taken advantage of the situation to enter the island, and couldn't help but sneer. Heh, truly worthy of being old friends we've known for years. Looks like our ideas are quite aligned, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion said with a faint smile, glancing at the other 6 Earth Supremes. The other 6 Earth Supremes, hearing this, forced a smile and pulled at their faces. All right, since we all have our hidden agendas, there's no need to pretend. For now, we must restrain the 4th Hall Master's spirit puppet as for the spiritual divine liquid. Let each of our strongest subordinates search for it, Mandala said coldly. The other 6 faction leaders nodded. They had been planning to do this from the start, and no matter what, they needed to at least see the spiritual divine liquid before acting. Otherwise, attacking now would be premature. With this shared understanding, the 7 of them immediately acted, unleashing terrifying attacks that swept toward the 4th Hall Master's spirit puppet, firmly restraining it to prevent it from driving out the infiltrating forces on the stone island. While the seven Earth Supremes held down the fourth Hall Master's spirit puppet, an ancient aura permeated inside the stone island. Amidst the rubble, flashes of spiritual light flickered, and figures began to appear. These figures were none other than the powerful individuals from the great Luo Heaven Domain. The moment they appeared, they immediately activated their spiritual power. To protect themselves, their eyes scanning the surroundings warily, afraid that there might be some terrifying presence on the stone island. However, their caution seemed a bit excessive, as the entire stone island was silent, and no sudden attacks emerged. Chen, seeing this, let out a slight breath of relief. But just as he was about to make a move, he noticed the expressions of the sleeping king, Heavenly Vulture Emperor, and others suddenly change. "What's wrong?" Chen asked, startled. "Something's wrong," the sleeping king said in a deep voice. His usually drowsy eyes now sparkled with sharpness, exuding an immense pressure that he clenched his fists and said, "My spiritual power is being severely suppressed." When he had previously activated his spiritual power, he clearly felt that his energy was under immense suppression. His once powerful spiritual energy was now moving very slowly. It seemed as though a strange force had sealed off their supreme sea, weakening their ability to channel spiritual power. "My spiritual power is also restricted." Heavenly Vulture Emperor and Spirit Pupil Emperor's expressions also changed slightly. Upon hearing this, the other kings quickly checked their internal spiritual power, and their faces became increasingly unpleasant. Clearly, they were all experiencing the same thing. Chen furrowed his brows and checked his own spiritual power. As expected, he noticed the suppression. However, it wasn't particularly strong. Overall, it was still within an acceptable range for him. "My spiritual power has been reduced by more than 70%, the sleeping king said, looking terribly grim. With such severe suppression, his spiritual strength now barely reached the level of a 7th grade supreme. "We're probably at around 60%. Heavenly Vulture Emperor and Spirit Pupil Emperor exchanged a glance and said, "We've been suppressed by nearly half." 9 Nether, Xun'er King, and other 6th grade supremes also spoke up. Hearing their reports, Chen was slightly taken aback, then said, "I've been suppressed as well, but it's minimal, about 20% of my power." At this point, everyone understood that the stronger one's power, the greater the suppression they faced within the Stone Island. "This Stone Island is indeed no simple place," the Sleeping King said, frowning. With this kind of suppression, their group's combat ability had been reduced to an unbearably pitiful level. The people from other forces must have also been subjected to the same suppression. The Heavenly Vulture Emperor spoke, clearly indicating that such suppression could not be confined to just their group. "Let's act together. First, let's find the divine spirit liquid." The Sleeping King raised his head, his gaze fixed on the depths of Stone Island, pondering. Upon hearing this, Xun'er King and the others nodded. Their strength had been greatly suppressed, causing a sharp drop in combat effectiveness. They needed to unite if they were to deal with any unforeseen incidents. With a shared understanding, they no longer hesitated. Their bodies transformed into light shadows and swiftly shot toward the center of Stone Island. Due to caution, they avoided high-altitude flight and instead skimmed just 10 or so zhang above the ground as they sped along. Chen and the others noticed the vastness of the island, which not only had rolling mountains and massive forests, but also a desert-like area. However, all of it exuded a wild, primal aura, making them involuntarily feel a sense of awe. What surprised Chen and the others was that, along the way, they encountered no hindrance or ambushes. The ease of their journey felt almost unbelievable. Regardless, after several minutes of rapid travel, their speed began to slow as they approached the center of the island, the peak of a green mountain. Chen and the others reappeared, their gazes fixed forward, where they saw a lake about 10,000 zhang wide. The lake had a brilliant emerald color, resembling jade liquid. The faint fragrance seemed to waft from its waters, with light mist lingering on the surface, giving the lake an ethereal quality. This is the center of the island and the area with the densest spiritual energy. The divine spirit liquid must be here. The Sleeping King's eyes were fixed on the lake as he spoke. The Spirit Pupil Emperor scanned the area. His eyes shimmered with spirit light, and then he spoke in a low voice, "Someone is coming." As soon as his words fell, Chen and the others heard the sharp sound of something cutting through the air. Several beams of light shot toward them and finally formed light shadows that landed on the peaks surrounding the massive lake. These light shadows belonged to the other top forces, who had clearly been torn open a gap by their respective leaders and had slipped into Stone Island. These guys just don't know when to give up. The mountain-splitting king couldn't help but curse. With their interference, it was clear that competing for the divine spirit liquid wouldn't be easy. Chen exchanged a glance with the Netherworld prince, both giving a wry smile that as expected. The leaders of the major forces were no pushovers. As more powerful figures gathered, the atmosphere grew tense. However, for the moment, everyone was merely on guard, with no outright conflict breaking out. Suddenly, a clear sound of water echoed from the vast lake, a sound so pleasant that it calmed the minds of all who heard it. Hearing this unusual sound, the sleeping king and the others' eyes sharpened, their gazes fixed on the lake, where the mist swirled, obscuring their view. With a wave of his sleeve, the sleeping king unleashed a surge of spiritual energy, sweeping the mist away in a hurricane. The massive lake became clear immediately. With the mist gone, Chen and the others saw that there were massive whirlpools forming at the center of the lake, from which light surged. Beams of light were ejected from these whirlpools. Everyone's gaze was drawn to the light orbs that emerged, each one radiating dazzling spiritual energy, as bright as the sun itself. Within each orb, powerful spiritual energy fluctuations radiated outward. Those are Chen and the others narrowed their eyes as they stared at the light orbs. Within the radiant light, they clearly saw the outlines of various objects, including what looked like scrolls and cauldrons. Though they couldn't fully make out the contents of the orbs, the intense spiritual energy alone told them that these were no ordinary items. Those should be the spiritual treasures within this secret treasury. The sleeping king's eyes flickered with excitement as he watched the orbs, his gaze darting from one to another. The divine spirit liquid should also be among them. Hearing these words, the mountain-splitting king and the others were all shaken to the core, their breaths growing heavier and more labored. Chen also felt a slight chill in his heart at this moment. He quickly scanned the directions where the other powerful forces were positioned and noticed that their eyes were all gradually turning red. However, despite the red-eyed expressions of the various forces, surprisingly, the atmosphere was eerily calm. Chen narrowed his eyes that he knew that this eerie silence was merely the calm before the storm. Now that the treasure had appeared, a fierce and brutal battle for it was bound to erupt. Chen's anticipation proved correct. This fragile silence lasted only a few dozen breaths before the strongest individuals from each force simultaneously let out low growls. Make a move. We must seize the spiritual divine liquid. At the instant this cry echoed through the air, the sleeping king, heavenly vulture emperor, and spirit pupil emperor shot out like arrows, their target locked on the brilliant light orb shooting out from the vast lake at the same time. From all other directions, the strongest individuals from each force also darted forward like shadows. The violent spiritual energy erupted almost instantaneously from around the massive lake, and a brutal, all-out battle for supremacy among the 7 top forces broke out in full force.